Hello, hello. Is it on? It is indeed.
Mine's on? Oh, we on. Okay.
We'll wait literally 15 seconds for folks to file out and file in so we can all be heard. But it's a 30-minute panel, but they put us on a 28-minute clock. So we're going to, yeah, it is unfair. It is unfair. But we're going to keep it moving here. Welcome. As you can see, we're talking about the future of sports in the metaverse. And the last panel was speaking about NFTs and the future of NFTs, and obviously those are intrinsically linked to the sports world. But this panel in particular, we want to talk beyond the collectible NFT into how the experience for both teams, players, fans, and the everyday sporting athlete that we all are, if you've ever been someone like me and torn their calf trying to play basketball on a Saturday morning, how that experience works for us. So I want to start the first question with you, Todd, in particular, thinking about moving beyond the collectible, once again, beyond just the NFT that doesn't have any utility inside of it. How do you see the blockchain technology and Web3 applications bringing the fan experience to teams and players closer?
Right. So really, we see it as a utility, as an extension of a digital marketing program, the next generation of digital marketing, and really integrated within any sports brands, whether it's a team, whether it's a league, whether it's an individual athlete, within their overall programs for matching fan engagement with the intensity of the fan passion and the fan love for the sport. And we see that the way to make that happen is to really reduce friction in the process and to not let some of the hurdles that are involved with Web 3.0 today interfere with what the utility can make happen. So it's how do you tap into that excitement? How do you get the fan, when they look at their device, which they will during any sporting event, how do you get them pointed back towards the event itself, back towards the athlete? So I'll leave it there, and I'll pick up more if you want.
Oh, sounds good. Jamael, you focus on brands and how brands interact with the sporting world. Can you give a little insight into, because brands are intrinsically tied with sports. So how do you see brands being a part of this, fan interaction experience being tightened in the metaverse space?
I would say it's more so of a connectivity, right? You're able to experience a brand in a space where it's kind of augmented and may not be, it's an interchangeable way to look at it from the reality and virtual. When we're speaking to brands now, currently, being able to kind of immerse them in that space in the metaverse, being able to allow them to see, all right, this is an opportunity for consumers to consume you in a different way, whether it's through content, whether it's virtually in different games. So currently, we're working with a gaming company called SimWin. SimWin is an augmented virtual simulated game where people are it's 24/7, 365, you're able to watch games, but it's virtual, right? But being able to have your brand within the stadium or on the court, on the basketball court, it allows them to be able to be in different places at multiple times. And I think being able to have that is giving consumers a different way to consume them.
I want to get a little bit deeper into the sports fan experience, and we talked about the principles for Web3 centering around ownership, centering around community, and centering around choice. So, Todd, could you talk also a little bit more about how you think that fan ownership experience expands in this context?
Yeah, so I think it's really important, first of all, is it has to be about the whole fan base. How do you activate the whole fan base as opposed to being restricted to the incredibly narrow field for any sports brands fans that are crypto and NFT savvy today? All right, so if you look at that overlap, it's really, really narrow. But if you look at activating the full fan base, then you can make great things happen. We had an experience this past weekend with Major League Rugby. We were able to activate 8% of the fan base inside a stadium with a QR code up on a Jumbotron simply by reducing the friction. Make it easy, make it possible for everyday fans who don't have to know how to set up a MetaMask wallet or anything else, and get them involved, get them on the hook, get them interested in participating, and make it something that they care about. And I say that in Boston, right? As a native Bostonian, like my everyday fan is the Boston Bruins fan. This is the guy with the gear bag in his truck and a stick. He's going to the 11 o'clock beer league game. He's getting up the next morning to go to work. That guy does not own any crypto. He's not going to set up a MetaMask wallet, but he'll do anything to get closer to the Bruins, right? Anything to get to Bergeron before Bergeron retires or leaves Boston. And if you can align those things and own a little piece of that, let them own a little piece of that action, and get them interested in some of the other aspects of the utility, then you can really bring them in. But you have to reduce the friction to make that happen.
Let me take that to the nth degree. Jamael, where you had to say something?
I
Sorry.
wanted to chime in on Todd just to his point. I'm from New York, so I'm a Yankees fan. So what?
Ooh, let's go Mets. Let's go Mets.
You think about a player like Aaron Judge. To your point, connectivity, right? Being able to still be attached to the player through the utility, and I think that connectivity and those utilities allow them to feel a part of the game in a different space, in a different way. And I think from an NFT perspective, being in the metaverse, understanding utilities and brands, even those brands are able to utilize utilities to be a part of that simulation, if I might say so myself. Yeah.
And I want to come back to that, but I want to bring Emily into this discussion in terms of connecting the metaverse with the physical world. And we're talking a lot about the context of sports and athletes in the professional context. But as I alluded to at the top, a lot of us are weekend warriors, and thinking about how that applies to me outside of that context. And Emily, your company deals a lot with the connection between body and technology, and we were having a very interesting conversation about privacy in this space. Can you talk a little bit about the metaverse and how it could actually impact the privacy of the everyday athlete?
Yeah, so I think the thing that's really like a challenge in the Web 2 world is that you're limited by Web 2 architecture. So like all of our data is stored on AWS, right? So it's all in a centralized location. And that works really great. You can encrypt it. You can do all kinds of things. We take privacy very, very seriously. But one of the things we've heard over the last week after Friday's Supreme Court decision is, there have been calls across the internet to do things like delete your menstrual cycle data from, apps like Clue and Flow that track that stuff. And that to us is really scary because that data is so important, not just for tracking your periods, but you can use that data in order to increase your success of conceiving and getting pregnant, which is super important to a lot of people. You can also use that data to train. So if you know what phase of your menstrual cycle, and so if you're pre-ovulation or post-ovulation, you actually need to be sleeping different. You need to be hydrating and eating differently, and your ability to respond to training is different. All that stuff, Whoop coaches on, and we've seen that when we coach people to train according to their menstrual cycles, they make faster gains, they feel better, and it's their favorite feature. And so now there's this really scary call of stop letting, apps and wearables and all these things know about your menstrual cycle because it's going to get subpoenaed and used against you or whatever. And so, when we're thinking about what the future of data privacy and all these things can look like, the sort of Web3 promise of, more ownership of your data, more control, and, greater opportunities to create privacy than what a Web 2 architecture can offer. It's sort of this exciting promise of a very effective way to work around those really scary calls right now.
So essentially in the sports and entertainment context, we've been talking a lot about the acquisition of more ownership with a team, for example, and we'll get into more examples of that. Or in the entertainment context, the potential to keep more ownership of the work that you create. But Emily, what you're really talking about from a Web3 versus Web 2 architecture is the ability of retention of ownership of what you already had rather than the acquisition of something more.
For sure, yeah.
Point. Period. Okay, great. Yeah. So with that said, I wanted to make sure that we had that conversation as part of it too, to ensure that we're not forgetting that there's a very real world and individualized application to these principles, even when we're talking about them from the largesse of sports. But I do want to dig deeper into the pure sporting side as well, and ask a question that's been on my mind, which is we've seen, for example, fan-controlled football league has issued NFTs that have indicia of team ownership in it. We saw some of the Big Three, which is a 3-on-3 basketball league that was founded by Ice Cube and gained popularity. They this year have announced that some of their teams will have fractional ownership in the form of NFT. And we even saw just a month or so ago an NIL collective out of Michigan issuing a DAO for NIL. So the question that I have from that is, Do you think that there will be a time that there will be a major franchise sports team that is owned in part or completely through Web3 principles?
Yeah, I'll try to take that. I don't think so, because it could be the ownership, but the decision making probably is not to be left up to the crowd, because the crowd doesn't always make good, smart decisions, and a lot of times they make decisions that they think are hilarious and have horrific impacts on anyone who actually would have to deal with those decisions. I think what we see, teams that are entering into DAOs and they're allowing their fans to vote either through a DAO or through some other minor way of enabling that, they're really restricting them to very, very, very minor and incidental type of decision making. Even things like, which one of these 3 choices for our kit do you want us to wear on Saturday, right? Versus any kind of meaningful decision making.
John, really quickly, Todd, really quickly, since John has admonished us that this will be going on the web for all to see, could you explain really quickly in 45 seconds what a DAO is?
Yeah, so that's going to be the joint ownership of, really quickly. So the joint ownership of an individual entity, whatever that's a team, whatever it might be. In this case, we're talking teams. And then the decision making around that is driven by the various different fractionalized ownership positions for all the people who own positions within it.
And Jamael, same question. Do you foresee a future like that?
I'm actually on the opposite side of the spectrum. Being a former athlete and understanding the dynamic of not being a fan and an athlete as well, I think there can be amendments when it comes to fractional ownership, because the biggest thing is ownership. The biggest thing is wanting to be a part of something, and even though it may not be a significant decision you're making when it comes to decision of a team or different things to that magnitude, I think being able to have a team that's kind of owned by the fans, depending on what that looks like from a structure standpoint, I think it could be pretty interesting. And there are actually people who are looking at that now, being able to do that from a, I want to say, VC space, with being able to have some of their shareholders to be a part of ownership with the team that they're bidding for. But I think there is definitely going to be an opportunity in the near future to be able to have something to that magnitude, because it gives even more in-depth look at what it means to own something on that level. And I think fans and entertainment alike is going to be interested in that.
Do you think that'll be a true DAO or something that's a little bit of a hybrid?
I think it'll be a hybrid, 100%. I think it'll be a little bit of a hybrid.
Yeah, so as Todd was explaining, DAO, this decentralized autonomous organization. I think in the future it'll be a little decentralized. It's like a little d, little a, big O is likely the outcome. But I want to ask a question that slightly pushes back on your analysis, Todd, or at least ask another question on top of it, which is, you're correct. If you give a decision to a large group of people, they're going to do something hilarious with it. It's the nature of the crowd. But do you think that analysis changes in the form of a DAO or other Web3 principle where the participants have paid in to be a part of it? So now they're not just making decisions because it's an internet poll that has no consequence to them, but they actually have true agency in the form of paid-in ownership.
Yeah, I think it continues to be a problem. They may take it seriously, but to really, and you know more about creating a winning sport franchise than anyone else up here, right? But what does it take? I mean, it takes a long-term commitment to a strategy and to build out around that strategy a series of tactics and to staff and to find the right players and to run the right plays and all of that. And I don't think a true DAO has the focused intensity to actually make that happen, any kind of coherence of thought, and any kind of longevity to it. Right, so I think that's fundamentally a problem, which is why only a hybrid would work.
So let me bifurcate it for a moment then. So I think we're all in agreement that a true DAO, true decentralized, complete ownership to the crowds probably won't work at the highest levels of sport. But let's separate the world between on-field, on-court, and off-field, off-court things. So sure, the decision between here's our 4 kits, which one do you want to pick? That's a fine decision to leave to the group. Who we should draft next year, maybe not. However, do you think that there are some functions, some of the front office type functions or organizational functions that do have impact on the field or on the court of play that could be ripe for that kind of decision making, such as, for example, scouting?
As a armchair scout, with absolutely no repercussions for any decisions I might make, I'd like to say yes, but the reality is absolutely not. So I think that's best left to the people who actually know what they're doing.
Jamael?
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think it's relative, right? Being able to take a thought process in terms of let's see who we want to draft, which actually impacts the overall organization. You have to have specific individuals that understand that level of decision making. Now, it could be where we're looking at it from a space that those individuals are vetted. They are maybe have experience in that space. And to your point, whether they're buying in, which money is relative, but being able to have that skin in the game, so to speak, you have to look at those three dynamics in itself and try to amalgamate those when it comes to something to that magnitude. So I think no, but there's always a possibility to do something unique in a space that is ever changing.
Yeah, I think you're making the important point of what does skin in the game actually mean? Because if I could just spend $1, have that tiny bit of ownership, and then do something hilarious, there's a lot of people who are going to do that. People like doing things that are hilarious. So you can't, I think, ever get truly they have skin in the game, because.
Yeah, because there's a comfort level there too as well, right? Being able to do something that's funny that makes no sense, but again, it's a business. So we're looking at it from the bottom up, right? You're looking at the foundation and who's at the foundation, but also the decision makers at the top. So how can we integrate that, and allow it to make sense? It has to be some vetting system. It has to make some sense in terms of that level of organizational hierarchy.
All right, let me throw another permutation in here for a question. Because currently we're contemplating teams that are in, let's say the 4 major sports. We're contemplating major league type of teams. Could you envision a whole league that was in this position, such that every other team that's in the league is dealing with the same sort of decision-making capacity? Do you think that would diminish the cost of hilarity, as we have put it here today?
I think that would be a really difficult league to be a stakeholder, such as a player in, and to see what that happens. So I think the best analog for this probably is shareholder voting in publicly owned companies, and the kind of restrictions that are put, the kind of really focused structure on decision making that's there, and the kinds of answers that come back, and how frequently those questions are asked is very tightly controlled by the people who have the fiduciary responsibility to run the company. Right? So if you ended up doing that same kind of structure, where you had people who are really running it, people really making the decisions, and then the DAO decision input is done in a very structured but meaningful way, then you can maybe get some kind of coherence out of it.
I'd like to reverse engineer that a little bit, right? What does it look like for a league that's owned by players? What would that look like? I think. For what we're doing with SimWin is, like I said, a sports company that I work with and I'm an advisor for. Players are able to own virtual teams. Now, what would that look like for players to do that in real life? I think, for instance, we're launching a TV channel called WSTV, which stands for Women in Sports TV. We're looking to see how can we get players ownership in that company, and they have ownership in content, they have ownership in what that looks like. I think having that on a higher level can be really interesting, because I think it will increase margins for, and I would say, connectivity from athletes to fans, but it will also allow players to feel that they have more, like the MBPA, for instance. Some players are a part of that in terms of decision making with the league and how that looks. I think having a league like that can be pretty interesting as well. So just kind of looking at that from that perspective.
Yeah, just add to that. One of the great things we've seen in Web 3.0 is it's the moment that players can really pursue their agency within the ownership of their brand, the connection with the fans themselves, and then also it creates additional leverage within the leagues and the teams, right? And it's this fantastic recognition of the value that we as fans place on the players in a way that they haven't currently been able to activate. But now it gives another opportunity to activate that and really push. And so you see more empowered players, I think, now, and you'll continue to see that trend.
Yeah, because I think, to your point, players want ownership. just working with some players now. We work with LaMelo Ball, who's a phenomenal player, who we helped get equity in different companies. Players want ownership at a younger age, so and they want to be able to be a part of something and have some decision making in that space. You're seeing LeBron, Steph Curry, players like that who are doing it at an older age, but being able to have that now is what the space is kind of asking for.
In the Web2 space, there's an opportunity to get closer to players, but not as much opportunity to sort of own a piece of them, which is what people want more of. Do you think that that the advent of this technology will drive that consumer, desire to own more and more and more of their favorite players because now we have the technology that allows it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you have the ultimate view on this, right? But as a player, most players that we speak with, and the teams that we're speaking with, there's a massive leakage of value into social media platforms and into those central offices, right? So anytime an athlete with a lot of followers makes a tweet or they post something on Instagram, like Mark Zuckerberg or someone at LinkedIn or wherever they're doing it, makes more money. And they probably have enough money at this point, right? And so for the players to retain more of that value creation themselves and more of that direct linkage with the fan without that leakage happening, that's part of what this promise is. Have that direct connectivity, cut down on the number of middlemen, and instead make it fan to player, direct interaction, direct relationship, and that's part of what the larger trend is here.
Now, Emily, you all are, you have the wearable devices that connect the technology to your body. Are you all giving thought to how that technology connection to body also connects on the Web3 space? Or are you really thinking about it much more from the data perspective that we talked about earlier?
Well, we've been exploring a lot of these ideas in the Web 2 framework. So we have this feature called Whoop Live, where any athlete out in the world, like a professional athlete competing in a televised event, can broadcast their Whoop data, so like their heart rate and their strain score, which is our measure of how hard you're working, directly to the TV, also things like calories. And then we've seen like a much richer broadcast experience, so the broadcasters love it because it gives them stuff to talk about in terms of how hard people are working. So, you can see the athletes sweating or, doing something incredible, but there's this really cool added dimension when you see them like, oh, and his heart rate's only like 140. He's so chill. That's amazing. Like if anybody watched the US Open, the golf tournament recently, like all of that, there's a lot of Whoop Live there. And it's so cool to see the pros right before when they're lining up a shot, their heart rate's like 70, like they're so calm. And the new guys, their heart rate's like 130. And so much of golf, right, isn't about being strong or, or the strongest or whatever. It's about like, can you like focus and get in that zone and like line it up perfectly and make it happen? And so it's really cool to see that dimension that like the pros are able to get their heart rates down and do that and like that they can talk about that kind of stuff. But again, to Todd's point, right, that's all going to like TV broadcasting. They're selling more ads, all these things. The athletes aren't getting they're not participating fully, even though it's their data that they're doing. It's literally like what your heart is doing. It's the most personal stuff that there is. And so making it easier for athletes, I think like in a cool way that like how Twitch has made like given people a platform who never would have been televised or anything. So making, athletes at all levels able to monetize that data and able to participate in like those profits more directly, I think is an exciting future.
Sure. Now, sports has served in large society as a metaphor for life in general, whether it's teamwork, hard work, participation, perseverance, all of the other catchphrases we use when people win a championship. In this space, I think there's an opportunity for sports to lead in terms of adoption. All the things that we're going to hear about today, throughout the day, in all of these rooms, are sort of for naught if the rank and file member of society can adopt it. So two questions really is, do you think the sports world is doing a good job of that now? And do you think that there is a responsibility from the sports world, because it's such an easy entry point, to be that frictionless teacher for how to enter this brave new world?
Yeah, I absolutely firmly believe that. Like, how do you make it as simple as possible to interface with your fans and to honor that sacred relationship between fan and player, fan and team? Like that's something that if you can do this in a frictionless way in ways that are accretive to that value, you're going to have a more passionate fan base. You're going to have a a broader fan base, and you're going to appeal, and you're going to bring in new people. And a passionate fan is a profitable fan. A passionate fan brings in more fans, and that's the whole game. You have to do it as low friction as possible, and you have to appeal to as large a part of your fan base as possible, or otherwise this is just a little bit of a gimmick. You're going to carve a few bucks out of the crypto world, but you're not actually going to make this a sustainable revenue stream or something that's going to be accretive towards your goals.
And I think to your point, Todd, to kind of harp on that, you don't want it to be a gimmick, right? You want it to be have as much honesty and integrity in it as possible, and I think it humanizes the experience as well. So I think organizations will continue to see what that can look like, exploring it, because we're still in that early exploratory stages where things are kind of developing and people are getting nooks and crannies. I mean, getting the trial and error part out of it. So I think there's going to be an opportunity for organizations to kind of look at it from an analytical standpoint, with analytics and data to back it up, but also you still want to incorporate the human experience in it as well.
Emily, any thoughts on that front?
I agree with what everyone said.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting to see a lot of the stuff that sports are doing, and exciting to see, be a part of pioneering in that space.
We have about a minute and a half left. If there is any question from the crowd, because there's probably more interesting than the ones that I've asked. But if there are not, then I'll probably ask everyone just for their last parting shot in terms of what would you be if you had someone who was a sports executive in front of you who didn't know about the space right now, which you do have those people in front of you who don't know about the space right now. What is the one takeaway you want them to have at the end of that conversation?
Yeah, this is not magic pixie dust. This is a new technology that can help you relate more closely to your fans, and you need to think about it through that lens, not through carving out a few extra dollars from some willing and maybe not very smart smart spending. I shouldn't say not smart. It's very smart people, but with spending money in not a very smart way.
I think from a brand perspective, if I can take that take on it, I think you want to be able to allow them to understand, just speaking to brands on a consistent basis, that the Metaverse and Web3 is an extension of your brand. You're able to now double down on what you've been doing in the real world. And I think being able to have a consumer base that is focused on the virtual space of branding, I think will allow them to kind of double down and kind of be more influential in that space as well.
I'm going to take the opposite approach from you, because I think it was the most exciting for the athletes themselves, and sort of that ability to have more control, more ownership, be more empowered with what they're creating. And so it's kind of cool to hear you take the fan perspective, because it's well, if it seems like everybody wins, right? The brands win, the fans win, the athletes win. So that's kind of exciting.
Well, thank you, Todd, Jamael, and Emily, and thank you all for taking the last half hour with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.